Hello everyone, Matt here. In the last video on Thomson, I covered the basics of rights and obligations, the distinction between positive and negative rights, and how rights can be outweighed or forfeited. In this video, I'm going to cover the basics of Thomson's argument. Let's begin with the typical pro-life argument. We began with this premise in the first video. The typical pro-life argument begins with a premise such as this: a fetus is a person with the right to life. And in the last video, we talked a lot about the second part of this premise, the right to life. Thomson also considers the first part of this premise, that a fetus is a person. Many defenses of abortion pay close attention to this part of the premise, that a fetus is a person. And there are several arguments that seek to provide a rational basis for why we shouldn't think of a fetus as a person. But for the purposes of Thomson's argument, she grants this part of the premise. One of the reasons why she wants to grant this part of the premise is she wants to make this an argument that is as strong as possible. She attempts to argue like this: for the sake of the argument, let's grant that the fetus is a person with the right to life. She admits there are good arguments for denying that a fetus, especially at the earliest stages. Thomson mentions a fertilized ovum and how there are good arguments for thinking that a fertilized ovum is not a person. But for her purposes, she admits, for the sake of the argument, that a fetus is a person with the right to life. The argument then goes from there to a premise like this: the right to life outweighs the right to control what happens in and to one's body. We talked about rights outweighing other rights in the previous video. Of course, this is just definitional. Premise 3 is just definitional. Abortion kills a fetus, and we can conclude from these three premises that abortion is morally wrong. As far as premise 2 is concerned, the typical pro-choice argument is going to focus on the fact that a woman has the right to control what happens in and to her body. This is sometimes called the autonomy argument. This argument, this typical pro-life argument, denies that and makes the claim that the right to life outweighs the right to control what happens in and to one's body. Now, as I said before, for the sake of the argument, Thomson grants premise 1. She does not attempt to provide an argument against premise 1. Thomson's argument is about premise 2. She is going to provide a series of arguments for why we should doubt that premise 2 is true, that the right to life outweighs the right to control what happens in and to one's body. So let's take a look at how this argument goes. Thomson's argument begins with a thought experiment. We can call this the violinist thought experiment. She asks you to imagine yourself waking up in a hospital bed, not knowing how you got there, and you turn to see that you are lying in bed near another bed, and in this other bed, a famous violinist is there. And you notice that the violinist is unconscious, and the violinist is hooked up to you through a tube or a series of tubes. Now, try not to focus too much on my amazing artwork. As you're laying there noticing your surroundings, the doctor comes in and apologizes. "I'm sorry, but the Society for Music Lovers kidnapped you in your sleep last night because there's this famous violinist who has a rare kidney disease, and we searched the entire country to find someone who's a match, and it just so happens that you are a perfect match. The Society of Music Lovers kidnapped you in your sleep, brought you here, and hooked you up to this violinist. The violinist needs to use your kidney to save his life. Unfortunately, you're going to have to be hooked up to this violinist for 9 months in order to save the violinist's life. We're really sorry. We did not give them permission to do this, but you can't leave because you're hooked up to this violinist, and if you unplug yourself and leave, then the violinist will die." The thought experiment is supposed to call into question this premise that the right to life outweighs the right to control what happens in and to one's body. So you are the one here that has the right to control what happens to your body. The violinist has the right to life, And if the right to life outweighs the right to control what happens to your own body, then you cannot unplug yourself from this violinist and leave, even though it's going to take 9 months to cure this violinist of the disease and allow you to leave without the violinist dying. Thomson thinks that most people will think that this is absurd, that you are under no obligation to stay in the hospital bed hooked up to the violinist, that you can leave anytime you want, even if it means that the violinist is going to die, because you had no control over this situation. You didn't volunteer for this. They kidnapped you in your sleep. So you can get up, unplug, walk out, even if the violinist would die, and it's not morally wrong for you to do that. Now, if this is the correct verdict in the case, then this shows that this premise, the right to life outweighs the right to control what happens in and to one's body, is false. Because if that was true, then the violinist's right to life would outweigh your right to bodily autonomy, or the right to control your own body and what happens to your body. If that's true, then you cannot get up and unplug yourself and leave the hospital bed. Thomson thinks that most people will have the intuition. I mean, it's a bad situation, but it's not morally wrong for you to unhook yourself from this violinist. And this shows that this premise is false. The right to life doesn't always outweigh your right to control what happens in and to your body. Now, if we think about the violinist thought experiment in the context of abortion, many defenders of the pro-life position will note that if we want this to be analogous to the normal case of pregnancy, then it seems like it's only going to be analogous to cases of rape. So we would have to rephrase our argument. We could still retain premise 2, the right to life outweighs the right to control what happens in and to one's body, except in cases where someone is kidnapped and forced to do something against their will. And this addition of except in the case of rape makes it more analogous to a case of pregnancy. So now we've got our argument that has been revised in light of this, and this might be acceptable as a pro-life argument. So you've got an argument that defends the position that abortion is morally wrong in all cases except the case of rape. But not everybody is going to be satisfied with that. People on the pro-life and the pro-choice side are not going to be satisfied with this. So this is Thomson's famous violinist case. This is one of the most influential arguments in defense of abortion. In the next video, I'm going to explain the rest of Thomson's argument.